who's got the right plan for Queensland's future when it comes to youth crime, health, housing, cost of living?
This will make a difference to household budgets.
Our focus is not on stadiums.
We can have a great games.
We have a lower tax plan.
But he won't tell Queenslanders what is in his plans.
There's a line in the sand here.
Who do you trust?
The state needs a fresh start and people have to vote for it.
We want to get in there and deliver change. I'm in this to win it.
Live from Brisbane, this is the Sky News Courier Mail Queensland People's Forum. Now your host, Chief News Anchor Kieran Gilbert.
Hello and welcome to the Sky News Courier Mail People's Forum. Please welcome the Premier and Opposition Leader. Thanks everyone. We've got a room full of undecided voters chosen independently by YouGov, as well as the Courier Mail's voter verdict panel. We've had the toss of the coin. David Crisafulli to give the opening remarks to kick off. Thank you, Opposition Leader.
Good evening, Stephen. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time, and it's a great opportunity for me to share with you our plans to deal with those big four crises that are impacting Queenslanders: youth crime, health, housing and cost of living. And before you vote, I urge you to ask yourself, in the last 10 years, do you feel more safe in your home? Do you think it's more likely that an AMBO will turn up in your hour of need, or you're more likely to be stuck on the end of a ramp? Are your kids and your grandkids more likely to be able to own their own home? Do you see more people sleeping rough? And those big kitchen table bills, are they getting more difficult to pay? Now, we've put forward plans to deal with all of those crises, and they are a crisis, and Queensland needs change. But if you want to see change, you do have to vote for change. And I'm urging you to look to make that change and vote for a united and a focused and disciplined opposition that's hungry to serve you. And we're offering a fresh start for Queensland. Thank you.
Thank you. Premier.
Good evening, David. Good evening, David. Thank you, Kieran, and thank you so much to our audience for spending time with us tonight. Hello to everyone watching at home as well. Being Queensland's Premier is the greatest honour of my life, and I've tried to make every single minute count. We've made those mining billionaires pay a fair share of their taxes and used those funds to fund our state's infrastructure, as well as our cost of living package. $1,000 energy rebates, 50-cent fares, 20% off rego, $200 fair play vouchers. And now I have a plan for our state's future, including a plan for cheaper energy, cheaper fuel, and to make sure that the littlest Queenslanders get one healthy, nutritious meal every day. We've built 7 satellite hospitals, and I have a plan to build 7 more. I have a plan to rebuild bulk billing in our state with 50 new bulk billing GP clinics across the state. You know, sometimes people say that there isn't a difference between the major parties, but this election, there is a big difference. I will always back our health workers, and I will never cut them. I will always defend a woman's right to choose. I will always do what's right for Queensland and what matters for Queensland.
Premier, thank you very much. Let's get straight to our questions. We don't vet these questions from this wonderful audience tonight. They can ask anything they like, how they like. Lorraine is going to kick off. Thanks, Lorraine.
Good evening, Premier, Opposition Leader. My name's Lorraine. My question tonight is very personal to me. My sister and my brother-in-law are both in hospital. They've received horrendous outcomes. My sister, in July this year, waiting years and years and years for full knee replacement. She needs it for both legs. Her knee was so deformed. They now think that they've put the wrong shape prosthesis in. She can't even bend her knee. She's been in and out of QE2 hospital. They both live in Logan. Her husband, they're both elderly in their mid-70s. He has Parkinson's. He's been misdiagnosed by 2 hospitals, QE2 and Logan Hospital. They both said to him, "You can't empty your bladder, sir. You have an enlarged prostate because of your advanced age." Well, that wasn't actually correct. Finally, Redlands Hospital, who's been in the media a lot with missed cancer diagnoses, got it right. He has a terminal bladder tumour. Now, why are they missing something as important as that? He has been shoved from hospital to hospital because these suburban hospitals, they can't cope with complex comorbidities. Oh, you have glaucoma, sir? Well, we have to now send you to the Mater for day surgery. He has Parkinson's, he's not a well man, he's away from his family and they can't visit him. My sister doesn't drive. So they're both in care, they're in hospital. Why is that happening? Are doctors being so pressured to see as many patients as they can that they can't give enough care at an emergency department, or are diagnostic tests being reduced? I also had a disabled sister. She was misdiagnosed just before COVID started. As soon as a private gynaecologist saw her, that's tumour, that's cancer. Yeah. 2 family members.
Thanks, Lorraine.
Yeah, I'm really sorry to hear that story, Lorraine, and thank you for sharing it with me. That the specifics of it, I'm happy to go away and look into what's happened there for you. I spent 3 years as the state's health minister. I can tell you that our health workers do the very best they can, and we do have one of the best universal health systems in the world. You're right, though, there is increasing demand and pressure on those health services, particularly as the population ages, and we see a lot more people with those kind of comorbidities, which requires much more complex treatment. And our doctors and nurses, I know at all of those hospitals, I know many of them at QE2 and Redlands and Logan, they do their very best. We have big expansions coming for all 3 of those hospitals. We increased the health budget this year by 11%, a massive increase in additional funds.
Yeah. Opposition Leader, yep. Well, let's hear from you, please.
Well, the Premier's right. They do a great job, but they do a great job in a system that's buckling under pressure. And the figures show how much pressure they're under. The surgery waiting list has doubled since the government came to office. And when they came to office, ambulance ramping was at 15%, and it's now 45%. That's the worst ever recorded over a 6-month period in any Australian state or territory. And it's not their fault. They're the ones in there trying to hold the broken system together. And we've got to get resources to the front line. So I'm sorry, in that introduction, we heard the usual scare campaign about cutting health workers. We need more health workers. We need more of them, and we need to put them back in charge. And my commitment is that every single health and hospital network will have a current serving clinician on that health and hospital board. So by day, they'll be in there working in the system. By night, they'll be helping to empower them to do the job. We've got a plan to deliver resources. We've got a plan to deal with triaging, and the Queensland health crisis just cannot continue the way it is.
Let's hear from Tammy now with the next question. Thanks, Tammy.
Hi, Premier Opposition Leader. My name's Tammy. I'm a member of the Jewish community here in Brisbane, and I'd like to know, based on what we've seen happening in the communities, in the universities in Queensland and around the world, what do you both plan to do to tackle the rising anti-Semitism and hate and for the safety of your Jewish community members?
Let's go to the Opposition Leader first. Thank you.
Call it out. Call it out when we see it. And some of the behaviour has been abhorrent. And we're harking back to an era of a century now. We haven't seen anti-Semitic behaviour like this in Queensland or in this country for over a century. And foreign policy is something that's dealt with in a different parliament. But as leaders, we have to call out that behaviour. We're better than that as Queenslanders, and we should be doing all we can to unite the state in every way, shape or form. So when behaviour is like that, we must call it out.
Premier.
I think this is something David and I can agree on. There's no place in Queensland for hate, for violence, for anti-Semitism, and I'll call it out too.
Let's hear from Mick now with the next question. Thanks, Mick.
Hi, good evening, Premier. Good evening, Opposition Leader. First of all, good luck tonight. I'm personally living in Brisbane. My kid lives in Sunshine Coast. Due to the fact that my work and profession, I can't find a job, obviously, in Sunshine Coast. Southeast Queensland, we have a big problem with the traffic between Brisbane and Gold Coast and between Brisbane and Sunshine Coast. In fact, there is only one road that leads between Brisbane and Sunshine Coast, and there is no public transportation. Would your administration or any of you two administration will be open to considering a privately funded initiative to enhance the state road as a solution to these problems?
Just as a background quickly, I lived in Japan, I lived in Germany, and I'm
born in Israel, and I saw an alternative roads that can be implemented. The question is if you will encourage a privately funded.
Thank you, Mick. Let's hear from the Premier and the Opposition Leader.
That's a great question, Mick, and it's one that's close to my heart. I live at Mango Hill, so I commute half of the trip from Brisbane to the Sunshine Coast every day. We have that big upgrade coming from the Gateway merge north to Boundary Road, which is going to fix that bottleneck. And on the southern leg down to the Gold Coast, we have the second M1 under construction, the Coomera connector. We do have a plan to work with our investment company, QIC, to deliver a road, a new tunnel road from the Airport Link tunnel to Castledine, to around Beams Road. Well, we're going to use our state investment company, but similar theory. And then, of course, at both ends, there's public transport solutions too. So Gold Coast Faster Rail, the extension of Gold Coast Light Rail, Sunshine Coast Heavy Rail, and of course making them all 50 cent has made a lot of people rethink whether they want to battle the highway or take the train. So that's our plans for those two legs.
There's been a real shortage of infrastructure in Queensland for a generation, and we do have to get cracking. And the biggest impediment standing in our way is one militant union called the CFMEU. And unfortunately, they're far too influential in Queensland. They have a big role in selecting who the government of the day is at the moment. And if government changes, I'll owe my loyalty to you, not to the union bosses. As a result of their militance, productivity continues to fall. And the Premier mentioned that Coomera connector. That's a really important project. It started as a second motorway to the Gold Coast. Well, it started as a 6-lane road at $1.5 billion. It's now a 4-lane road at $3.1 billion. And I look at other projects, and we're talking about heavy passenger rail. We've got to get that all the way through to the CBD at Maroochydore. Otherwise, it'll create a car park at Caloundra. Premier's right. He spoke about that tunnel. That's got to happen. There is no shortage of infrastructure demands for this place. But you need to understand that Queensland is going to continue to be a place where people want to move to, want to invest. But good governments plan ahead. And we need to start doing that, generational planning. We need to make sure that we protect your lifestyle and make sure that when people come here, there are opportunities for their kids to afford a home and for them to be able to drive around. And that takes planning and it takes vision. We haven't seen that for a long time.
Mr Crisafulli, before we go to Kimberley with her question, I want to ask you both this one in relation to the 50 cent fares the Premier touched on. You're saying you're going to reduce debt, reduce taxes, you're going to keep those fares. How is it sustainable, a 50 cent fare for public transport? I know it's popular, and it's probably unpopular to ask this question, but on a permanent basis, how is that sustainable?
Kieran, we justify it on the basis that it can ensure that people are using an asset that's already there and maximising the most out of it. I've always been someone as opposition leader that I look at ideas, and if it's something to me that makes sense, I don't care where they come from. And this is one of them that we looked at and we thought, yeah, that makes sense. What we want to see, though, is to make sure that the frequency of those services are reliable and that they're safe and they're frequent. And that's an important part of it. But we look at it this way. If we can encourage people onto public transport, that means that you don't have that really convergence of capital all at one time in one location. So it made sense to us, and so we've backed that, and we think it makes sense into the long term.
I think this is something you had thought of when you were going to uni, as on the train on the way in and so on. But same question, or similar. When you look at the running costs per trip, isn't it about $19 from the analysis I saw for every trip? How do you cover that shortfall with 50 cent fares?
You're right, Kieran. This is something I've wanted to do ever since I was catching the train from Petrie. I grew up in the outer suburbs, and it never made any sense to me that we charge the people who have to travel the furthest the most. I think it makes it harder for people to get to work and to education, and they're the people we most want to get off the roads and onto public transport. When you look at the amount we invest in capital for these things, what we were recouping in fare revenue was a fraction. So the 6-month trial cost $150 million compared to the tens of billions of dollars that we've spent building the train lines and the trains and everything else. And so I think it makes a lot of sense to me to get people using that infrastructure, get them off the roads and save them a lot of money in the process.
Okay, let's hear from Kimberley. Thanks, Kimberley.
Hi, good evening, gentlemen. How are you? Yeah. Look, what I'd like to ask you about this evening is if either of you have got any plans to change the DV laws about women having to leave their homes when there's a situation. I think men need to have more accountability and they need to be removed from the home instead of the woman going into crisis accommodation with small children. You can build as many refuges as you like, but at the end of the day, until you change the laws and you make men more accountable for their behaviour, things will not change. You will just be wasting money and pouring it into refuges where it's a perpetual cycle of single mothers and poverty and homelessness. So do either of you have a plan on changing those laws? I'd like to hear that.
Kimberley, thank you. Premier, first to you.
That is a really great question, Kimberley, and I know that very often the police and our DV services, they want to keep the woman and probably the kids safe, and sometimes in the moment the easiest thing to keep them safe, the easiest way to keep them safe is to get them out, but that dislocates them and effectively punishes them for a crime that's been perpetrated on them. We have been talking with services about how to facilitate leaving more women in place and taking more men away, including dedicated accommodation for them where intervention services can be delivered. So we have been discussing that with them. We've also invested heavily. We've increased our funding to those DV services by 20%, and we'll keep doing that because we've got to keep women safe. The other point you make, though, is a cultural one. We need to be teaching boys from when they're little that it's not right to hit women, and that's where this starts.
Absolutely. That's a unity ticket from you on that, no doubt.
Very much so, and it is a crime and it has to be treated as such. And we've looked at Tasmania, who've embarked on a very interesting program of fitting GPS trackers for those high-risk offenders, and we intend to bring that to Queensland if we're elected. It's important, and the Premier's right. There's a lot we can do in that service area, but we also have to make sure that we're doing a lot in the education space, and we have to make sure we crack down on those who are those repeat offenders, because it is a crime and we have to deal with it.
And we do already use those GPS trackers.
Kimberley, thank you. We'll hear from Brett now, just next to you. Thanks, Brett.
Good evening, gentlemen. I'm a transplant from New South Wales. I've been here for the past 12 years, and I've recently found out that abortion was totally illegal in this state until 2018. It's only been a recent change. I was wondering, going forward, what both of you would be willing to put on the table to ensure the rights of not only the mothers but the fetus.
Brett, thank you. Let's hear from the opposition leader. Thank you.
Well, Brett, this has been a very topical conversation in this election because the Labor Party have sought to make it a political issue. There will be no changes to abortion laws if government changes in Queensland, and we have been very upfront about that. And the scare campaign was run, and my message didn't change. And today, one of the key parts of that platform was taken away from the Premier when the Katter Party said they're no longer going to introduce that private members bill that they were talking about. There's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of uncertainty, aside from this one message that I want to give to every single Queenslander today. There'll be no changes to abortion law, and I want Queenslanders to hear that directly from me, because the level of vitriol and the campaign that is being run on what is a sensitive issue has crossed the line, and Queenslanders need to hear that directly from me.
Given that Katter Party's also backed away from it, is it time to drop? Is it time to drop the scare campaign?
Well, first of all, they've since retracted those statements and said they do intend to move towards a private members bill. But can anyone tell from David's answer just then what he thinks about this issue? I mean, this is a really important issue.
I think it shouldn't change.
Everyone knows.
I think it shouldn't change. The laws should remain the same.
Will you have a conscience vote?
The laws will remain the same.
What is your view?
There will
what do you
be
personally
no change.
think?
So the scare campaign will continue, but you need to hear it directly from me.
Let me answer.
Well,
let me answer the question.
The scare campaign will continue, but it's not happening.
Give a straight answer.
Okay. There will be no change. None at all.
Are you pro-choice or not?
There will be no change. The legislation is there and women will have access to that legislation. That gives women the right to choose. It is a healthcare issue. All the silly little wedge questions you've been asking, all the silly little TikTok videos.
It's not silly.
Well, they are, because we've ruled it out.
There is no Queensland woman.
We have ruled it. No, mate, your campaign has been silly because you know we've ruled it out. And women deserve better than the scare campaign that's been run. It's a sensitive issue. There will be no change, and you need to hear that from me.
That sounds emphatic. That he's ruled it out. What more does he need to do?
Well, he should tell Queenslanders what his own view is. He voted against those laws.
My view is that the laws should not change.
He has candidates and MPs who are telling people that that's their position until the election, but after the election they intend to change it. There will be a private member's bill. David has said that his members will get a conscience vote on that bill. And that means that Queensland's abortion laws could change. Now, Queenslanders know where I stand. I moved those laws. I was the health minister that decriminalised abortion in our state, and I will always defend a woman's right to choose. And there'll be people here who don't agree with me. There'll be people here who don't agree with me, but I will always answer Queenslanders' questions, and tell them what I believe. And that's something David just can't do.
Sorry, Kieran, I've been very direct, so I will be again. You can see the desperation.
No one else thinks that's correct.
Well, it's okay. There will be no change to abortion laws in Queensland. Now, that's very direct.
So no conscience vote?
There will be no change at all. So that's a pretty definitive answer. And I know you're desperate.
We'll leave that to the audience.
We know you're desperate, but I want Queenslanders to know that the scare campaign should not cut a single mention in your mind, because we have ruled it out.
Queenslanders know where I stand.
If there was a conscience vote, you'd vote against it.
Kieran, there'll be no change.
Okay.
And my team has said.
Would you vote for it or against it?
Well, let me answer that.
You voted against it last time. What would you do this time?
So the Premier's talking about the vehicle to get there. I'm telling you the result. There will be no change to those laws. And that's what people need to know. There will be no change.
What's your view?
And my team,
what do you believe?
My team has backed that in. And the journalists here tonight have asked all of my team, and all of my team have said the same. I know it doesn't fit the scare campaign. I get it.
It's not an answer.
You've built the TikToks around it.
You've got to answer.
Get it. There'll be no change to those laws. And if we are elected in 4 years' time, I hope to come back here and everything that the Labor Party says, every scare campaign, I will point back to this moment. Those laws will not change. My team has backed in that position.
Let's get to the next question. We've got a question from Vicky. Thank you.
Good evening, Premier and Opposition Leader. Just moving away from that subject for a second. Queensland has the most biodiverse environment in Australia, yet we have the largest rate of deforestation and land clearing. Can you both expand on what your plans are over the next 4 years to align development with protecting endangered species? As a local wildlife, part of a wildlife rescue group, koalas, we're finding it strange that the Lord Mayor is selling Brisbane as the koala capital of Australia. We've got the Olympics ahead of us. Again, the koala and some of our other wildlife are going to be very important. How are we going to protect those icons without bowing to developers?
Vicky, great question. Mr Crisafulli, thank you.
Thanks, Vicky. In 3 parts. Firstly, when we're doing planning schemes, we have to set aside areas that are worth protecting, and we have to defend them. And we have to make sure that they are concurrent areas so that a koala population has the critical mass to survive. There was a study done from Griffith University that shows at the current rate we won't have a koala population in the Northern Gold Coast unless we do something. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we have to absolutely make sure that we are protecting areas right across the state. Now, the current level of protected areas in Queensland is about 8.5%. When the government came to office a decade ago, it was in the low 8%, and the commitment was it would be at 17% today, and it has barely moved. Now, the best way to do that is to work in partnership with private landholders to create protected areas where there is a benefit for that landholder as well. All of those things are possible. We just have to work in partnership. But the big thing in the southeast is making sure that we do have the koala refuges to do the job, and we've helped partner with some in the Moreton Bay, and we said we'd like to work with them as well. But the planning schemes have to protect those high-value areas and then allow the other areas for development to house the growing southeast.
Premier.
Thanks, Vicky, and it's a great question, and thank you for what you do as a wildlife carer too. That's really important. It's close to my heart. I was the State's Environment Minister for 3 years, and that job really it changes you. In that time, we introduced new land clearing laws that have driven down the land clearing rate here in Queensland. The LNP opposed those laws, but we will keep them. We'll continue to expand national parks, including with new programs that allow us to use them as carbon offsets, so to drive investment from around the country and around the world into conserving nature here. And then when it comes to the southeast, which is really where those challenges for the koalas are, when we did the review of the South East Queensland Regional Plan, we were really clear on making sure that we constrain the urban footprint so that we retain the koala corridors that we need, and part of that is increasing the amount of density in places that are already developed, because when you've got the population growth, you're either choosing to open up new blocks and have more sprawl, or to have more townhouses and duplexes and higher rise, and so that's why in that plan we've increased the mix of more density. Some people don't like that, and so we get a bit of NIMBYism. They don't want to see that in their street, but that's really a key part of how we can protect more of the environment for all of those critters that we love.
Before we go to Larissa's question, just one for both of you on an issue where I think it's fair to say a lot of people would suggest you're not being upfront with the Queensland population. This is on the Olympics. I'll go to both of you on this. First of all, to you, Premier. QSAC, a Commonwealth Games facility of that generation, the smallest capacity, I think, since Amsterdam Olympics of 1928. You're saying that's going to be the athletic stadium for the Olympics when this beautiful state is going to be on the world stage. What do you say to the argument from many Queenslanders, many in Brisbane, who say it's an embarrassing proposition and you're going to have to change it?
Well, it's a planned redevelopment of that facility, and that was proposed to us by the IOC. We are going to run Brisbane 2032 is going to be fantastic, but it can't be bottomless. You need to draw a line somewhere, and I've drawn the line at $7.1 billion. I know other people want to build a new stadium or redevelop the Gabba that would cost billions more, and I've said I'd prefer that money to go into our schools and our roads and our hospitals and our cost of living relief packages. We'll still deliver a fantastic games. We're going to get a new arena nearby. We'll get an upgrade here at Suncorp Stadium, which I think is more than suitable for the opening and closing ceremonies. So I know David wants to say that people are embarrassed, but I don't actually meet a lot of people who are. They know Brisbane 2032 is going to be great, but they also want to stick to that original budget.
Your suggestion is that you won't build a new stadium. You're going to stick to that envelope. If there is a scenario, say, where your review comes back after 100 days and says, why don't you build one in the city? There's space opposite the current Gabba, where the Cross River Rail on that site potentially. Are you ruling out a new stadium 100% if that review comes back and says, have a public-private partnership and build a new world-class stadium?
Well, Kieran, firstly, if I can just address the Premier's comment, I haven't met anyone who isn't embarrassed by the prospect of spending over $1.5 billion on temporary stands at QSAC. People don't believe that's legacy, and they don't believe that's the right option with the eyes of the world on us. And I think deep down the Premier knows that, and it was a decision he made as Infrastructure Minister. After wasting 1,000 days, they needed a pressure relief valve and they just picked that site, and it doesn't make sense. Kieran, the whole notion of the Games was about generational infrastructure, so our terms is not new stadiums. We want generational infrastructure. But that doesn't mean that we can't have upgrade to facilities that people are proud of, and that doesn't mean that we can't have world-class venues. But the focus has to be on road and rail, on tourism, a 20-year tourism plan, using the Paralympic Games to create accessible cities. Let's use the communication upgrade to build in resilience for our disaster mitigation. That has to be our focus.
But
if you're asking me...
But the Gabba is at its end of life in the early 2030s.
So, Kieran...
So why would you knock it down after the Olympics?
And our commitment is after nearly 1,200 days of chaos and crisis, we're asking for 100 days to do a review of the facilities and make sure that we can deliver world-class games within that funding envelope, but a games that people can be proud of. And I can promise you we are not going to go and put it at QSAC at temporary facilities because the Premier made a mistake and released a
So
full
it's another question that David won't answer.
Well, you've had 1,200 days and you've stuffed it up.
Tell the people what your plan is.
So 1,200 days. Are you proud of your record after 1,200 days?
We're going to deliver a fantastic game.
Lock in no, Eddie. But
well, I answer questions.
In 100 days, we'll sort out
yes
his mess. 100 days, we'll sort out his mess.
Here's Larissa.
Kieran, you actually stole my thunder.
Oh, sorry,
my question was actually about the Olympics.
Run with it, run with it.
Oh, I will. Thank you, Premier and Opposition Leader Crisafulli. Coincidentally, my question was on the Olympics. I, like many Queenslanders and residents of the South East, was very excited when Brisbane was named as the host country for the 2032 Olympics. But then we also saw the embarrassment of Melbourne pulling out of the Commonwealth Games. I know they're a different kettle of fish, if you will, but please tell me we're not going to pull out of the Olympics. And where are we at with all the infrastructure, given that the time is ticking on us hosting the Olympic Games?
That was a good one too, I think. Thanks, Larissa. Well said it. Premier.
And a good follow-on. We have all of those venues progressing through a very deliberate process, so a planning process. Many of them have already gone out to tender. So the Moreton Bay facility, the Sunshine Coast facilities are on their way out to tender. And then others require more planning work. So the new arena at Roma Street is going to be amazing. That's a $2.5 billion project there at Roma Street. It'll be a new concert hall for the city after that. These games are going to deliver new venues right across the state, but the real benefit will come with the infrastructure, things like Sunshine Coast heavy rail and the ability to extend the metro into other parts of the southeast. So rest assured, despite what David says, it's going to be a fantastic Games.
It will be a fantastic Games, and hopefully a change of government will ensure we'll have the venues to deliver it. But Larissa, I want Queenslanders to be proud of the Games in every part of Queensland, and it will be special. And you need to know that it can be delivered on time and on budget, and it can create generational infrastructure. And one of the things that we've announced as part of it is a $250 million fund, which we're calling Getting Games Ready. And it's for grassroots sport. And we want that to be spread right throughout Queensland, because I want everybody to feel that this belongs to them. I remember as a kid growing up in country Queensland what Expo 88 did for our psyche as a state. We felt like, my goodness, this is our moment in the sun. Well, this is Expo 88 to the next level, and I want Queenslanders to be excited about it. And I know we can deliver that kind of generational infrastructure, and that's important to us, and I'm sure it's important to the state as a whole.
Yeah, it's a wonderful state, people moving here in droves, as you both know, so an exciting decade to come. Let's hear from Jim with the next question. Thanks, Jim.
Hi. This is to the opposition leader mainly, but the Premier is also welcome to take part. I was listening closely to the Tough on Crime campaign, and I paid attention to the second debate at the Press Club, and the opposition leader was giving answers about youth crime, and then a question came up about white-collar crime and political donations from developers to politicians. And suddenly this radical course change happened. And it turns out your position on that kind of crime is to legalize crime, basically legalizing what's currently prohibited, donations from developers to politicians. And you gave a very, very long answer that went everywhere, to the point where, again, people kind of laughed at the end of it, just for how many directions it went in. I'd like just a couple of things to narrow down, just very, very simple, clear answers. Will you change the laws so that developers can donate to councils, and as well as being able to donate it to state members, which they currently can't? And I guess to both of you, what is it that you think developers give politicians money for if it's not corrupt influence?
Thanks, Jim. Well, Jim, firstly, it's a big stretch to call people white-collar criminals because they're a developer. That's the first thing I'll say. But if I may answer your question, in the first one, no, there won't be changes to the council, to the donation to councils, because the report that the government used to change the donation laws was based on a recommendation not to have donations at a local government level because they're the planning approval. The question that I answered, and it's certainly not a day one item for us, day one for us is the Making Queensland Safer laws, which will embed adult crime, adult time to deal with the mess that we've created with the laws that were weakened a decade ago. But I was asked the question, do you think it's fair that a developer can't donate at a state level and yet the unions, i.e. the CFMEU, can? And my answer is either everybody should be able to donate and disclose in real time, or you go to the South Australian model where no one can donate. Now, I'd be happy to look at both of those models, but I don't think you should say one class of people have no right to be able to donate, but yet the CFMEU, which builds things and has a hell of a lot more of an influence on the Labor government of the day than somebody putting an application to build houses. I just think there should be a level playing field, and I answer that question honestly and openly.
Let's hear from the Premier on that, if you can. Why should there be a differentiation when unions can? Why shouldn't business?
Well, I think people can work out for themselves why the LNP wants to get political donations from property developers, and comparing property developers to trade unions that represent tens of thousands of Queenslanders it's not a fair comparison. They're not the same thing. They're not
CFMEU. The CFMEU.
They're not the same thing.
They're a criminal outfit. They are bikies. They own you.
You just want the money from the property developers.
They put you there.
Anyway.
And they're still on government boards. We still have CFMEU people on government boards in Queensland.
That's not true.
We're at a good time to get a question for each other now, actually. Why don't we do that, Premier, if you could ask a question of the opposition leader, and then we'll... It seems a good time.
Well, mine's a really simple question, and it can come with a yes or no answer. Do you believe in a woman's right to choose? Yes or no?
Well, it probably won't work for his TikTok, but yes. Oh, that got you, didn't it?
Why'd you vote against
it?
Why'd you vote against it?
My question to you, Premier. Premier, it's the People's Forum. So I'm not going to ask a question. I'm going to get a brave Queenslander to ask a question. This one's from Victor White. Victor White's wife, Violene, died. She was killed when she was going shopping, allegedly at the hands of a repeat young offender out on bail. You went to Victor White's house, and then you went and did a media conference, and you said nobody could possibly say that that death was preventable. You never went back to Victor's house, so he's asked me to ask you this. Surely you don't believe that someone who is out on bail, an alleged repeat offender, surely you still don't believe that that death wasn't preventable?
Well, of course I don't, David, but that's also not true. I didn't hold a press conference after meeting with the White family. Obviously, that was an awful tragedy. I've also met with Cindy several times since then, and she has phoned me several times since then. I often meet with victims of crime, but I don't make a big deal about it. I express my sympathies to them and look for ways that we can help them and support them. This is a very complex issue. And the idea that you can fix it with a four-word slogan that you yourself got from a focus group, it's just misleading people. Well, what it takes is a comprehensive plan informed by the experts, and you cannot find a single expert to say that your plan will make any difference at all or prevent a single crime. Our community safety plan is working, and I know you reject the police data, but the police data show that it is working, and now's not the time to throw out a plan that is working just because you've picked up a good four-word slogan.
Before I'll get your response, I just want to, because you both take the issue seriously, I know that. Can I just get a show of hands? Who's been impacted by a crime in the last 12 months, either your family or yourself? Has anyone? Okay, there's quite a few up the front here. Okay, is it a bigger issue in the regions or in South East Queensland as well? Can I get your thoughts on that?
Kieran, it's an issue right across Queensland. And there are 289,657 victims of crime in Queensland in the last 12 months. That is more than Victoria and New South Wales, despite their populations being much larger than ours. The youth crime crisis, the seeds were sown when the government made a decision to weaken the laws when they came to office nearly a decade ago. And on the back of it, crime has continued to spiral out of control. And the Premier can do all he likes to try and pretend it's not an issue. We have put forward the most comprehensive plan ever taken to an election. And if government changes by the end of the year, the Making Queensland Safer laws will be laws. Adult crime, adult time. Detention as a last resort will be removed and the rights of victims will be embedded in legislation. But we are also going to get serious about early intervention. We can't give up on kids. So we're going to do what hasn't been done for a long, long time. We're going to get in, measure and turn things around. When a young person leaves detention, at the moment they have a 72-hour plan. And we found out during estimates, half of them don't even get access to that. Every child will have a 12-month plan, 6 months intensive, to give them every hope to turn them around. We're going to have youth justice schools. We'll have remote sentencing options for those kids as another option rather than putting them in jail. We are serious about this. And the only people denying there is a youth crime crisis is the government that created it. And I'm urging you to vote for change because it is important that we deal with it. It really is.
Premier, is that a fair characterisation? Are you denying the crisis that exists?
I've never denied, Kieran, how important community safety is and how we need a comprehensive plan to deal with what is a very complex problem. We do need to invest in detention and make sure that those detention facilities are rehabilitating young people, but we need to intervene before that to prevent crime before it occurs. That's what our plan does and is proven to be doing. We also need to provide better support for victims, and that's something that we've focused on. We've expanded resources to Victims Assist. We've appointed a Victims Commissioner, all to support victims better. But our plan is designed to prevent those crimes before it occurs, and the police data, the data we get from police, is showing that it's working. Now, David's own police spokesperson said that they saw crime as a way to win seats. And that's why every day of this election campaign, that's all he's talked about. Not cost of living, not housing, not health, not all of the other issues that we also know are important. We need to stick with the plan that we know is working.
I was literally talking about health just yesterday.
We will crack on. Here's Simon. Simon, if you could stand up and fire away. Thank you.
Evening, gentlemen. I just want to say how proud I am from coming from England. I moved over here to Sunshine Coast about 8 years ago. I think Brisbane getting the Olympics is just a huge cue. I'm really excited about that. 2 questions. Live on the Sunshine Coast, working down here. I think Mick at the front said transport's just horrendous. It's a nightmare. I'd like both of you to give me a commitment if you were to get into power again, or power again, get into power, that high-speed rail is really, really important. And the second one is that you both talk a great story in terms of we've seen tax reductions, all this money is 11% on in the health, on the hospitals, the ramping, the rego reduction, the transport, the 50 cents transport. We've got the Olympics coming. There's going to be expenditure. I'm scared that we're just going to run out of money. And I'm a financial background myself, CFO. Just tell me we're not going to run out of money because you tell us everything we want to hear. And that's the big thing.
Thanks, Simon.
Well, respect for your money is one of our pillars, and you need to know that you deserve better than what you're getting, and you will. Now, I look at the money that we've spent on external consultants, particularly the big 4 in recent years, and it has spiralled out of control. And I want to see a world-class public service that doesn't have to farm everything out. I look at the billions of dollars in blowouts in projects that no minister has ever been held accountable for, and there must be a better way. We are going to re-establish a productivity commission in Queensland. The second order of business after the Making Queensland Safer laws will be re-establishing the productivity commission, which will make sure that it is a laser-like focus on getting government running the way it should, and it will do a review of the building industry. All of those things are important to us, and you need to know that our plan is fully costed and fully funded, and that matters to us. In answer to your second part of the equation, infrastructure is important, and we believe that heavy passenger rail needs to go all the way through to the Maroochydore CBD, otherwise it will create a car park at Caloundra. And to not propose the whole lot by 2032 would be a mistake, and we do believe we can deliver that project.
You've guaranteed that state debt won't get to $200 billion. Is that? Do you stand by that?
Well,
how can you guarantee that's the case, given the trajectory, as Simon articulated?
Well, quite easily, Kieran. We're not embarking on the $24 billion wrecking ball that is the Pioneer Vertic and Pumped Hydro Scheme. That plan would make all of your electricity bills completely and utterly unaffordable. It doesn't have planning approval, traditional owner consent, there's no environmental impact statement done, the Premier can't tell you what the modelling is on your hip pocket. All we know is it's $24 billion and climbing, and Queenslanders can't afford it. Our commitment is a maintenance guarantee to keep our current coal-fired power stations on, and we will transition to smaller, more manageable pumped hydro. We have a plan to deliver that, starting with Barumba, but we are not signing on to a $24 billion wrecking ball because the Premier...
I want to get back to Simon's question, though, if you can answer that, Premier. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Kieran, and thanks, Simon. It's a really good question. The last 2 years we delivered record surpluses. You're right, though, this year and next year we've gone into deficit to fund those extra supports that we're delivering to households. But our economy is really strong, and so we are projecting a return to surplus in 2026, 27, and a surplus from those years onwards. So that means that we can afford to do those really important things for the future of our state while returning the budget to surplus.
So debt is an issue that you're worried about for the next generations. It's not because, forgive me, but when you're, the 50-cent fares, the school kid lunches, they're all great and worthy ideas, but are you concerned about debt for the next generation?
Yeah, because our economy will continue to grow, we can do those things as well as return to surplus. That's what our costed plan is and says. You can't tell what David's plan is because he won't release it until Thursday, but our economic plan says very clearly that we will return to surplus in 26, 27. I don't think it's unreasonable in these couple of years when we've seen a real peak in the pressures on household budgets that we go into a small amount of debt to fund those things like the energy rebates.
Let's hear from Gail. Thanks.
Hi, my name's Gail. I live on the Sunshine Coast. Premier, Opposition Leader, I would like to know your views on daylight saving. As part of the Courier Mail's voter verdict panel, I actually had 4 possible questions which have been covered, but I have not heard very much about daylight saving. Previously, I have been a farmer on the Darling Downs. I have owned a small business in Mackay, and now I live on the Sunshine Coast. And I know that with the influx of people coming into Queensland, daylight saving has become a real issue. Lots of people are talking about it, and unless I've missed something, I haven't heard much about it in the state election campaign.
And is it the problem is, say, 4 a.m, the sun's up, and I guess a bit of dysfunction on the border too? What's the big issue?
I think the big issue is that when daylight saving was trialled, when we were farming, my children came to me one afternoon and said, "Has our daddy left us?" Oh. Because they never saw him. He was gone before they were up in the morning, and he didn't get home until they'd gone to bed at night. I also attended a CWA conference in Mount Isa, and the sun didn't come up until 8 o'clock in the morning. So even on the Sunshine Coast, I'm retired, but people getting home from work are getting home in the hottest part of the day. And then businesses come into it. There's a lot of rhetoric around about it. I'm not sure how I feel about it as a retiree, but I'd like to hear from the leaders.
Good idea. Let's do it.
Well, Gail, I know there's a lot of people who are very passionate about it, but I've lived and worked at both ends of the state, and I can tell you I would never embark on daylight saving because I know what it means to people in country Queensland, and I know what it means to my family and my dad who runs our family farm, and I want to unite the state. There's been a lot of division. I want to unite the state, and the last thing we need is to embark on a campaign talking about daylight saving, which will really divide the north and south, the east and west, at a time when we've got other big challenges. We've got to get youth crime under control, and we've got to get our health system working, and we've got to make sure our kids can own a home and the vulnerable have a roof over their head. We've got to deal with those cost issues. That's our priority. So I know there'll be a lot of people who that disappoints, but as someone who's lived and worked at both ends of the state, it is not on my agenda, and it won't be.
Yeah, we also don't plan to visit or revisit daylight savings for the reasons you've outlined. It might suit some parts of the state, particularly some parts of the southeast, but there are parts of the state where it could be really disruptive, and it's a big state. We've got to govern for all of it.
Thank you very much.
It's been quite a combative campaign. Can I ask you, do either of you have plans for truth in political advertising legislation in the next term, Premier?
We don't, no, but we do have some ads running at the moment from the LNP that are deeply misleading. The AMA have asked them to stop running them, and they've continued to run them, which is obviously, really disappointing, and it makes it really hard for Queenslanders to make up their mind when they're bombarded with things like that.
Well, the ad the Premier's talking about is our commitment to get rid of Labor's patient tax, which comes in on the 1st of July. The comments are exactly from the AMA and attributable to them.
They've asked you to stop.
Now, if the Premier wants to also campaign on removing a Labor tax that starts on the 1st of July, he could, and he should put that. But he was denying that it existed until a little while ago. So it is not misleading to say you are going to remove something that is in legislation and is due to start on the 1st of July. In answer to your question, Kieran, I'm very open-minded to it, and I'm mindful that there are other jurisdictions that have had it. My one underlying principle, though, that we can't move on, it cannot be used as a vehicle to silence people who have a difference of opinion. There has to be robust debate. It has to allow minor parties to be able to put forward different points of view. It has to allow the major parties to have a contest of ideas. But blatant mistruths do need to be called out. And in the modern era where social media can allow things to get a life of their own even when they're not true, it is an important thing, and it is one we should look at.
And on that payroll issue for GPs, if you'd like to respond, I noticed you did respond there. Is it not factual that...
No, we've clearly ruled it out. The AMA have begged the LNP to stop running those ads with their logo on it because we have no intention of doing that. In fact, the only plan in this election to support GPs and bulk billing is our plan to build 50 new bulk billing GP clinics.
It's in legislation.
Let's hear from Kylie now.
Hi, my name is Kylie. I'm a working mum full-time, and my youngest child attends kindy. Despite the Premier announcing free kindy for all Queenslanders this year, I'm already out of pocket $12,000 to send my one child to kindy. What's your plans to make more affordable childcare moving forward?
It's a lot of money. Premier?
Yeah, thanks for your question. It's a really important one. Our free kindy applies to the kindy component of childcare, and if you're in long day care, you'll still have those other childcare fees, which are largely regulated and subsidised by the Australian government. But I've put 3 kids through childcare. I know how expensive it can be, and what a relief it is when they finally get to school and you don't have to be paying it anymore. We do hope the free kindy component helps, but we need to keep encouraging the Australian government to provide better funding to our childcare centres so that they can pass those on to families with lower fees.
I was going to say something similar in terms of the federal government. It is important that we work with the Commonwealth. The big issue that a state government can do, though, is to deal with those underlying issues that is causing your stress around those big kitchen table bills. And I look at the underlying principle that has seen our electricity rise by 19.9% in the last 12 months. That's 3 times the national average, while our major power plant has been offline because it wasn't maintained. I look at the spiralling costs of insurance, and youth crime and a lack of flood mitigation has had an impact on that. Transport costs going up because of roads needing to be maintained. These are the things that a state can do. And what I'm saying to Queenslanders is we have to deal with those underlying issues. The free kindy is an excellent initiative. What we need to do is make sure that all of those other components that are really bogging you and your family down, that we deal with them. The long term. So yes, we need immediate relief for things, but we've also got to get back to a time when we deal with those structural issues to put downward pressure on the long term things that are causing you that price pain.
Our next question is with Chris. Thank you, Chris.
G'day, chaps. How's it going? My vote's up for grabs, and we've got a pretty big decision to make. My wife and I have started putting money away for a house deposit after rent has increased 50% in just the last 2.5 years, or since the floods. And I think we're doing all right, but honestly, every time I have a look at what real estate prices are doing around Kedron where we live, just in the northern burbs here, it very much looks like a pipe dream. And it's a real worry because I know there's a lot of people who are doing it tougher than we are. What do we reckon? What have you got?
Good luck. Let's hear from you. Let's go, Premier.
Thanks, Chris. That's a great question and a really important question. You know, I know how important it was for me to scrape together a deposit with Kim and buy our first home, and what that's meant for us and our family in terms of security and stability since then. And I want all Queenslanders to be able to do that. Our Homes for Queenslanders plan supports renters, so it does things like banning rent bidding and provides portable bond loans to make moving around rentals easier. But we also want people who are renting to be able to save to afford a home, and that's why we've doubled the First Homeowners Grant. We've removed stamp duty on first homes up to $700,000. That tapers off to $800,000. But on prices, we need to increase supply, and that's why we've got billions of dollars going into supporting the infrastructure that will unlock new construction, particularly density construction around existing infrastructure, so particularly train lines. That's where we need to see those additional homes constructed. So that's our $3.1 billion Homes for Queenslanders plan, and it's all about taking care of people like you, Chris.
Mr Crisafulli, your bid for Chris's vote.
I want to give you hope. I want to give you hope you can own your own home, and you deserve that. At the moment, our home ownership rate in Queensland is 63.5%, and I've named a shadow minister for home ownership, and if we win the election, we'll have the first ever dedicated one, and it'll be a single point of accountability to go from last to first. And the Premier mentioned it at the end of his answer, it's supply. If you have a look, in the last decade, supply's fallen by 29%, approvals, and we've got to get cracking again. And we've announced an infrastructure fund with councils, and it's going to go to those councils who are prepared to get cracking and put supply on the ground to drive down those prices. We are going to remove a tax. So we fought pretty hard to get that stamp duty threshold lifted, but every young person buying or building their first brand new home won't pay a single cent in stamp duty. The Housing Investment Fund, which is for social houses, that was announced 3 years ago, a $2 billion fund, hasn't built a new home yet that a Queenslander is living in. Every cent of that is going to be used for that. And we've got a partnership with the community housing sector to get those faith-based sectors going. Why do I mention those things? Because if we can stop the feeding frenzy at the bottom end of the market, that means that you won't see the crazy spikes in rental prices that you've seen, and that gets you into the market. And that single point of accountability matters. And I want young people who aspire to own a home to be able to own it. I want vulnerable people to have a roof over their head. And I also want Indigenous people who live in their communities, many of whom don't have ability to do that because the way that the schemes are drawn, those old Doggett schemes, I want them to own a home as well.
We will check with Chris afterwards and see who got that vote. Here's Katrina now. Thanks, Katrina.
Premier, opposition. Look, I wasn't going to ask a question because I get quite embarrassed, but you mentioned the cost of living and electricity. Me personally, being a single mother, I have tried so hard over many, many years to try and reduce the costs so I could actually support my family. And that was solar and solar hot water, gas stoves, so on and so forth. As it's actually increased, when you look at what you're getting for your solar rebate, it's staying, and yet my electricity is going up and up and up. And I just thought, you know, if I'm contributing back to the grid, why am I not compensated for that for the electricity going up? So I used to not pay any electricity bills, and now I am. And I'm. Yeah.
Well, let's hear from both. Yep. Thanks, Premier.
That's a great question, Katrina, and good on you for taking those steps to provide, you know, some upfront costs that can bring things down in the longer term. The problem, we've reached a point with solar where during the day we're generating more electricity than we can use, and so to increase the value of that solar, we need to put more storage in so that we're storing some of that solar from during the day, and then we can use it at night when electricity is more expensive. That's why we're building community batteries right across right across the state. It's also why those pumped hydro projects are really important, because they're what will deliver the deep storage that will take all of the excess solar during the day and store it for the whole of the night. Not many of those community batteries will be able to do that. First of those, on its way at Barumba. The second is the Pioneer Burdekin one near Mackay.
Sorry to interrupt, just a quick 20 seconds and then we've got your closing statements. We're out of time, so if you could just give 20 and then crack on with your closing statement as well.
Katrina, the only deep that the Pioneer Burdekin will give you is deep pain in your pocket, and we won't be embarking on that, but we've got a plan to get those power generators going again for that long-term push down on prices. It has to happen as we transition to a renewable future, but we have to use those power plants now, otherwise Queenslanders will continue to suffer. And that's why we've backed those immediate relief, but we've got to deal with the long term. We've got to.
And so your final thoughts now to wrap up.
Well, everybody, thank you very much for your time. I started this journey 4 years ago as Leader of the Opposition, and I said that I would unite my team, and I have done that. And I said that I'd focus on the issues that matter to Queenslanders. And when we started speaking about youth crime and health and housing and cost of living, we were told we were politicking and scaremongering and that we were making up stories. Well, I've sat in rooms like this now for 4 years. I've done 39 Queensland health crisis town halls with the Shadow Minister, and I've listened to frontline staff tell their stories, and I've listened to people talk to me about being on the end of a waiting list or people who've lost loved ones at the end of a ramp. And on the back of it, we formed a comprehensive health plan. I've been on people's backyard having a barbecue with them as they tell me the story about their kids can't sleep at night anymore because they ask, is the bad man coming back? And on the back of it, we have put forward the most comprehensive plan to deal with youth crime. I've sat and spoken to somebody who in the morning packs up his tent, gets in a car and goes to work and leaves his wife and his 3 kids, a working Queenslander who can't afford his rent. And on the back of it, we put forward the most comprehensive housing policy. And I've spoken to you a lot about those long-term structural costs of living. If you want change, you need to vote for it. And Queensland deserves change. And the state deserves a fresh start. And that's what we are offering this Saturday.
Premier, thanks.
Well, thanks everyone. Your questions were fantastic, and I really appreciated the chance to answer them and to talk with you about our state's future. I think Queensland is a great state, and I think we can make it even better. It's been an honour to be the state's Premier these last 10 months, and in that time I've tried to talk to as many Queenslanders as I can and deliver for them. That's things like 50-cent fares and $1,000 energy rebates, $200 fair play vouchers, 20% off rego. But now I'm laying out a plan for the state that if I had the opportunity of a 4-year term in my own right, that I'd deliver. And that's things like our plan for cheaper energy, our plan for cheaper fuel, our plan for 50 new bulk billing GP clinics, our plan to take the 7 successful satellite hospitals and build 7 more. I've done my best every single day to be really honest and upfront with Queenslanders. With me, what you see is what you get. And I care about this state. I love Queensland. I love this job. And I have a plan to keep supporting you with the cost of living now, as well as delivering what matters for our state's future.
Premier, Opposition Leader, thank you. Thank you to everyone in the room. They really were some wonderful questions. Thank you for being a part of it. And Shari, it's back to you.
Live on Sky News.